I think one of the things that I'm excited about as well is not only on the front end, how do you get these developers access to the resources that they need, but once they have four, five, six deals under their belt, what is the infrastructure that needs to be built around them to help them effectively scale their business?
Welcome to BuzzHouse, a Baker Tilly podcast where you can find all the buzz around multifamily housing. I'm Don Bernards, the partner in charge of Baker Tilly's multifamily housing practice.
And I'm Garrick Gibson, a partner at Baker Tilly, also specializing in consulting on multifamily housing transactions across the country.
Each week, we'll bring you a guest or a topic in the multifamily housing industry that will help you win now and anticipate tomorrow. Let's get started. We are very excited to welcome into the BuzzHouse today our colleague at Baker Tilly, Matt Paschall, a senior associate and underrepresented developer services advisor on our real estate advisory team. Welcome, Matt. We're excited to talk with you today.
Yes, thank you, Don.
Matt is joining us today to let us know what he has been working on around underrepresented developers in the affordable housing industry. But before jumping in, Matt, just a few updates from around the industry. We get a lot of questions around the topic of Build Back Better, which of course did not move forward, and if there's any potential federal legislation around the low-income housing tax credit that's currently circulating. Congress has been tied up, of course, with international matters and also the Supreme Court nomination, but the industry is kind of working hard on the side. Really, the top topic is remaining the current level of tax credits. As you all know, the last 4 years we've had this extra 12.5% of tax credits, and those go away in 2022. So actually, looking at 2022 versus 2021, we're down 12.5% tax credits of 9% tax credits. So that's just very important. And obviously that goes away a big hit in housing resources. And just a lot of people talking about inflation. It's very interesting that shelter, of course, is a significant component of the consumer price index, and the high housing costs are actually contributing to what the high levels of inflation that everyone's seeing. The shelter is about 33% of the consumer price index, which is the index we're looking at when talking about inflation. And all this is according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the CPI increased by almost six tenths of another point from December to January, and high housing costs are a big part of that. On another note, housing and community development programs received a significant increase in the long-awaited fiscal year 2022 Hud Spending Bill that was released on March 9th. It raises HUD funding by $4 billion, and increases are across almost all HUD programs. A couple of very key items is the omnibus contains the highest ever annual funding for public housing capital funds at $3.2 billion, over a $400 million increase. Additionally, the bill also includes $200 million in new vouchers for people experiencing homelessness and victims of domestic violence, and $25 million for mobility services. Choice neighborhoods, which many of you are aware of around public housing and other housing needs. Choice neighborhoods increasing by $150 million up to $350 million. So again, a lot of increases across the board. Finally, we've talked a lot about the state and local fiscal recovery funds, essentially otherwise referred to as ARPA funds, or these COVID-19 relief funds going to cities and counties throughout the country, and how these funds are not structured well to work with local housing tax credit development. Because either we're going to be grants or very short-term loans. There's actually a bill recently introduced into the House that will allow these SLRF funds to be brought into projects as long-term loans. So again, that's a very hot topic. We'll keep you up to date on what's going on in Congress and the Treasury around the state and local fiscal recovery funds. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Garrick, who will jump in our discussion with Matt. Garrick.
Thanks, Don, and always a pleasure to have that intro with what's going on in the world. Matt, thanks for being on. I really appreciate you coming on here. Looking forward to this podcast. Before we get going, we usually like to let our listeners know who our guest is. So why don't you go ahead and start by telling everyone about your role with Baker Tilly?
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you again for having me on today. I'm super excited to be joining you all and to be a part of this conversation. So everybody listening, I am Matthew Paschall. I'm a senior associate and underrepresented developer services advisor here on our affordable housing transactions team. And really, for the past couple of months, I've been leading our team's work centered around how we can leverage our brand as Baker Tilly and as an essential third-party intermediary in the affordable housing development process to go above and beyond for our underrepresented developer clients. So more specifically, understanding that barriers to them in the marketplace are often access to capital, access to relationships, and access to LIHTC education resources how can we, based off our relationships and standing in the marketplace, connect them with each of those things respectively. So kind of being able to position them and deliver them to capital sources that are specifically targeted towards their needs, to be able to directly or indirectly provide them with LIHTC educational resources based off our subject matter expertise, as well as make formal introductions to them to various syndicators, CDFI leaders, and lenders to make it easier for them to get products into their pipeline down the road. So it's been very exciting work over the past 9-10 months or so. And I'm really excited about the continued work that we're going to do in this space as it has always been a need, but is increasingly more so in this current era.
Yeah, well, thanks for that intro, Matt. I mean, that's going to obviously tie straight into our discussion here. So obviously, we've seen a lot of affordable housing industry really begin to focus on underrepresented developers. So for you, were there any type of aha moments with that respect?
I think really it just came from a conversation that Don and I were having, where we were working on a project together last year, and the entire project was almost a case study on why formal programming and services like this are necessary. And that we had a client who kind of needed all the hard work that he had done to get to this point on this project was very admirable, but also was very strenuous on him, and thinking through, okay, how can we make this process easier for future developers and future clients, is going above and beyond by making sure that he has access to the network that he needs, that it's easier for him to find pre-development grants and financing, as well as gaining access to the perm financing that he needs. And so it was really just sitting with Don, debriefing after a call and saying, I think that there's more that we can do. I think that we work in this space. We're already very good at what we do, but there seems to be a missing resource here. And I think that we are uniquely positioned to offer it. And so from there, Don gave me the okay, and we've been running with it ever since.
Very good, man. Thank you for that. Man, you kind of hit on this a little bit, and there's probably big obstacles. There's probably smaller obstacles, but just obstacles. Again, maybe you could reiterate, like, what are the obstacles that maybe these underrepresented developers are seeing in our industry, or kind of facing?
Absolutely. I think the main two, whether we're talking about affordable housing or just commercial real estate development in general, are access to the industry relationships and access to capital. So traditionally, underrepresented developers do not have the same kind of friends and family wealth that enables them to crowd fund capital at the beginning of their development process. So they're more reliant upon grants and other pre-development financing sources to get their deals off the ground. And usually, or at times, the developers don't know where those resources are or how easy it is to navigate that process to get to those resources. So I think that's one of the main things. And then the second thing is the industry relationships. So how can you go to a financial institution as a first or second time developer and get a perm or construction loan? I think oftentimes the banks still have very high standards around what they're looking for in a developer and in a potential client. And oftentimes the underrepresented developers does not meet the liquidity requirements that some of these banks may have. And so I think what we're hopeful for and part of the initiative is being able to give these developers the opportunity to present themselves and their work to these lenders to build and plant seeds earlier on in the process, so that the lenders understand exactly what the developer is capable of doing, exactly what the developer plans to do, and how they can work as a partnership in order to get the developer the capital that they need.
Thank you for that, Matt. And kind of, Matt, very, very tied to that. You kind of jumped in a little bit what I was thinking about for my next question for you. What have you been doing? I know you've been reaching out to a lot of stakeholders, be it lenders, equity investors, community organizations, I think, state agencies, state financing agencies. What are some of those steps? I assume it's addressing those hurdles you mentioned and around the financing and capital. What are some of those steps that you and other stakeholders are kind of working on?
Yes. So the main thing from a Baker Tilly front that I'm very excited about is the educational workshop that we have coming up in April, which is going to bring together community development professionals from across the country, a combination of community leaders, CDFI leaders, syndicators, lenders, as well as underrepresented developers and general contractors, to give the opportunity to educate themselves on the LIHTC industry, as well as to network with other industry professionals. So that's kind of a culmination of all the efforts that we've had. But to go back to the first part of your question, really what we're seeing is financial institutions are starting to think more creatively and innovatively about how they can deploy capital to minority-owned small businesses. And so part of it is that they're putting these services and offerings together, but they also want to know where the talent is or where are the developers that they can work with that are in the affordable space. So some of the conversations have been based off the work that we are doing. How can we complement what other industry stakeholders are already doing? So is it brainstorming new services that we as Baker Tilly can offer? Is it thinking through or challenging banks' traditional underwriting standards? And as Baker Tilly, being able to get them more comfortable with being flexible around amortization or the term of debt or interest rates. And then I've also been participating in some more grassroots type of organizing around this space, which is really pulling in different industry stakeholders from lending institutions, smaller development shops, financing agencies to think through in our respective sectors of affordable housing and commercial real estate development. How can we improve processes? How can we make resources more accessible to the developers that are navigating in these different regions to get access to the resources that they need, whether that be pre-development, whether that be meetings with city officials, whether that be zoning, but really better understanding and asking the prompting questions of what do these developers need? And then based off where we are and where we're navigating respectively, what does it look like individually to deliver? And then as a collective, what more can we do?
Thanks, man. I mean, you mentioned education also in that conversation. So, what are you seeing as some of the best practices and working on within the team that's working within the team around the education and the hiring processes?
So first, when we started working on our initiative internally, I think the main question that we asked ourselves was how can we ensure that our team and our staff is representative of the clients that we serve and the communities that they serve. And so when thinking about the fact that over 80% of the beneficiaries of affordable housing are communities of color, we wanted to ensure that in the long term, our team reflects that demographic. And so, being a Midwest-based company, we started to think more critically about, okay, how do we recruit in the past, and how does that inform how we recruit in the future? What new markets do we need to look in? What kind of partnerships that can we build with HBCUs or organizations like NABA to attract some unrepresented talent? And then we actually have partnered with a program called Open Access, which is a program that's mission and goal is to promote the growth of more Black and Latinx leaders in the community development space. And so that program was founded by Gina Nesbitt, and she is in its second year. And so we now have a fellow this year who has been fantastic, and we've really enjoyed that experience. And we're hoping to be able to form a partnership with that program and take on a fellow each year. So that from the staffing perspective, that's some of the work that we're doing. And then from the educational perspective, I think what really differentiates our team is the level that we went to educate ourselves on the history of housing in this country and the history of affordable housing in this country and why communities look the way that they look when we're talking about why a city like Chicago is the most segregated city in the country, why a city like Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in the country, and using that knowledge and educational experience to better inform the underrepresented developer services, to better inform how we're thinking about pricing when we're talking with certain clients, and understanding how the past has informed the current housing situation and what the future of housing and affordable housing will be. So when I think about best practices, I think about from an internal perspective, how are you thinking about hiring and staffing and promotion of talent within your company? And also, what is the work that you're doing to educate yourself on the affordable housing industry, not just from the policy perspective, but from the people perspective and from the impacts on health outcomes, educational outcomes, wealth outcomes, and other things of that nature.
Yeah, thanks, man. I mean, obviously, me being internal here and being part of some of those discussions, they've been quite informative. So let's shift gears and let our listeners know, what's going on outside of Baker Tilly. So we know we have a couple of industry conferences coming up where you're going to be presenting on panels around underrepresented developers and partnerships. So what are going to be some of those key themes you're going to be discussing?
Yes, no, thank you. I think the primary theme of a lot of these panels is going to be partnerships, and joint venture partnerships being one of the ways that underrepresented developers can build capacity, but also ensuring that those partnerships are mutually beneficial. right? And so when we think about what it means for a larger scale developer with more affordable housing experience to partner with an underrepresented developer, in the past, we've seen a lot of those partnerships not be mutually beneficial, not be fruitful for the underrepresented developer, oftentimes done to just check a box. So when we're thinking about what it means to be intentional and make a formal commitment to helping underrepresented developers build capacity, it's thinking about what goes into a healthy partnership. How do you assign roles and responsibilities to the developer to give them practical project management experience so that they can build capacity and eventually operate on their own? And I think too, it's about what other roles do HFAs, syndicators, CDFIs have in developing products for these developers to help them take that next step. And in addition, I think one of the things that I'm excited about as well is not only on the front end, how do you get these developers access to the resources that they need, but once they have 4, 5, 6 deals under their belt, what is the infrastructure that needs to be built around them to help them effectively scale their business? And what resources are currently available for them to do that? And what do they feel like is lacking in the marketplace? And so while Baker Tilly does not navigate in that realm right now, I think posing that question to the market on behalf of the developers is important. And so I think to be able to have some of the brightest minds in community development being able to speak to that and what they've seen and what they think the industry could do differently to better aid these developers on the back end is something that I'm really looking forward to as well.
Very good. And man, maybe just a quick second, kind of very related, and I know we're almost out of space. It was a highly sought after conference, the one that Baker Tilly and you put a lot of work into. And I think probably a lot of the same themes you just mentioned will be part of that conference. So let us know just a little bit about that.
Yes. So the educational workshop is going to be a day and a half of programming, and it's really going to walk underrepresented developers through everything from how to interact with the QAP and why the QAP is important and informs their projects in a specific region, to basic underwriting, all the way through once you get to, a couple of deals, how do you effectively invest in yourself and scale your business? And so our thought process with putting this event together was, we want to enable Baker Tilly to be a one-stop shop for all the needs that a developer may have. Directly, what are the services that we can provide, but then how can we get these developers in the same room with any industry professionals that they'll be doing deals with down the road? And so the attendees are going to be a mix of developers that have very limited low-income housing tax credit experience to developers that have built thousands of units. But the thought process was to get them all in the same room to network, to potentially discuss future joint venture opportunities, future projects, to collect feedback from developers that have been successful in the industry around best practices and what it looks like, whether it be underwriting to community engagement, and how do you collect feedback from the community around what their needs are. And then just more from the networking perspective as well, I think it's very important that although we're in affordable housing, that these CDFI leaders, these syndicators, these lenders see a room full of underrepresented Black developers and women as well, to kind of serve as a reminder that, these developers are more than capable of executing on deals. They're ready to execute on deals, and a lot of them have past real estate experience, even if it's not in the traditional affordable housing sense as well. So I think from that perspective, it's just going to be fantastic, and I'm very excited about it. And this will be the first of many events that Baker Tilly is going to put on. So this will be the first one, but we're hoping moves around the country to give developers from different regions the opportunity to engage with us, as well as other developers that look like them from across the country.
Matt, thank you. Wow, I love the vision. I love the energy. Really appreciate you joining us on the BuzzHouse today. Thank you,
Yes,
Matt.
absolutely, Don. Thank you so much. Thank you, Garrick. Really appreciate it.
Good.
Yeah,
And
thanks a lot.
listeners, thank you as well. Thank you for listening to BuzzHouse. To receive a notification when new episodes are available, please subscribe to BuzzHouse, a Baker Tilly podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. For additional resources around multifamily housing, check out bakertilly.com. And if you have a suggested topic, please send them to build@bakertilly.com. That's BUILD@bakertilly.com.